This one is special. You're all going to have to bear with me a little bit tonight on this one. Welcome. Welcome to the Computer History Museum. This is a real honor, and that, of course, was the opening from the Boston Computer Society launch of the Macintosh in the latter part of this week, 40 years ago. It's now part of the museum's collection, all of the inventory from the Boston Computer Society. So it's one of the things that we do, keep these things alive. So welcome, everyone. And special welcome to those on the live stream. There are quite a few people that we know signed up who couldn't get in the room today. So we thank all of you for getting here early and being appropriately misbehaving over the course of the evening. I want to welcome all of the special guests in the room. There are an incredible number of people who had a lot to do with this product and this whole effort, and there are a lot of people in the room today who are working on it today and carrying on. So we want to thank you all for what you did and what you will do and what those of you who have done. I also always like to thank the staff, the volunteers, and the trustees, of which there are many in the room, and the staff and the production crew for putting this together. It's always a fun time to do this. So here we are, 40 years after the launch of the Macintosh, Steve's introduction at the De Anza Flint Center, Conference Center, and it was a very special day. By way of introducing the museum, though, I would like to, before we kick off the program, mention one thing that we started working on a few years back. I've been here not quite 6 years, and that is to think about the notion of this museum into the future. And these artifacts and collections are unparalleled in the world, going way, way back in time. And those that haven't been to the exhibits, there's always an opportunity to sign up and become a member and join and do that. But one of the things I said is that CHM, which stands for Computer History Museum, could also stand for Computing, Humanity, and Meaning. And the question that we should always ask is, what does it mean to be a human in a world that does not exist without computing? Because it doesn't, as we all know. If it stopped, so would most of our lives. So it's a new era, and we're living in it. And I think as we think about our mission at the museum, which is to decode technology, the computing past, where we get agency in an event like tonight, the digital present, which is a moving target and very important, so partnerships are important for us, and the future implications on the human condition. It gives us great license to grow our audience globally using technology, and it also lets us reflect on what these moments in time in history have presented us with. Having met Steve in April of 1977 and then worked on this team, not anything to do with building the product, but we'll talk about it on the marketing panel, being involved in sprinkling it out into the universities and getting the next generation of students and others to participate in this ecosystem. The thing that I found fascinating in this particular program development is that Steve was an incredible student of history and everything about the thinking at that moment in time, including the Wheels for the Mind, which is why I have this binder with me, because I helped manifest that in the market, which was to reflect on the human condition given locomotion and a bicycle, and the implications on what an amplifier like a computer could do for the human condition. And therefore, the first slide in the Macintosh presentation was a Cuisinart, because what do you want to do with it? And there's many things that you could do with it. But also, when you think about Steve's return to Apple, Think Different was about things that happened in the past and those that changed the world. And by thinking and understanding the motivations for people in those moments in time, in the current, because history is really not about the past. It's the present, because here we are having a conversation with the past. And why do you do those things? Ideally, so you can reflect forward. And ideally make the world a better place. That, of course, was the intent that Engelbart had in the very beginning, which begot all of these things. So this day today is about computing and humanity. There's no question about it. And this is, I think, a seminal moment, was the introduction of the Macintosh to make that happen. So that leads me to one question before I introduce our moderator, and that is, how many people in this room who've at one time in their lives or in their day or in their week said to someone, I'm a Mac person? You didn't say you were an Apple person, though, did you? So this is about the ethos, right, which came from this moment, that lives on in this, obviously world-class company today and all the wonderful products and services that have come from it. So with that, let me move on to what's really important, and that's to introduce David Pogue as the moderator for tonight. And David, as you all know, is a journalist and an author, and many of you probably began your journey reading some of his original and early works about Mac for Dummies, the Missing Manual series, and it's really fitting that he's our host tonight. 13 years at the New York Times as a columnist, Macworld's Backpage magazine, and Emmy Award-winning journalist. So I'm going to introduce David Pogue and let him take over and run the show. So David, thank you for coming today, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys are so lucky to get a seat in here. This is the hottest ticket in town. So welcome to all of you in the room. Welcome to all of you who couldn't get in or watching on the live stream. There was one guest in particular who begged and begged and begged for a ticket. And we're like, all right, dude, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, the co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak, is here. That's all we got. Thank you very much. And Steve's wife, Janet, is here. This is such an honor. If the 22-year-old me, when I got my first Mac, knew that someday all those iconic figures would be seated in one place. I mean, if a bomb fell in this room right now. As a matter of fact, let's just see. Do me a favor. If you ever worked on the Mac, past or present, would you mind standing right now so we can see how you represent? Wow! That's very cool. You on the live stream, you can stand too. In your pajamas. On a more serious note, we should also acknowledge the memory of a few people who should be here, key players in the Mac origin story who are no longer with us. Bill Campbell, Debbie Coleman, Dennis Grimm, Brian Howard, Carol Kaler, Jeff Raskin, Larry Tesler, Tricia Wilcoxon, and Steve Jobs. We salute them all. So we are going to offer you 3 panels tonight. We are going to explore the origin story of this machine, which took place 40 years ago tonight, January 24. The first panel goes inside the creation of the Mac. The second panel will explore how the marketing made it a culture and a cult. And the last one will look at the lasting impact of the Mac. In each of these conversations, you are going to get to meet the original key players. We track them down. We drag them here. These are the mothers and the fathers of the Mac. And I would go so far as to say that their being here tonight is historic all by itself. So the first panel involves, my setting the scene for you. The year is 1984. The biggest movie star in the world is Eddie Murphy. Ronald Reagan is the president, and Michael Jackson sets his hair on fire. It is the year of the very first TED conference, the year of the very first CD player, and the first time a woman has ever run for the White House. Didn't succeed. And what a year for movies. Oh my gosh, 1984, Ghostbusters, Terminator, Beverly Hills Cop, Gremlins, The Karate Kid, Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, and This Is Spinal Tap. Oh, to be alive in 1984. Computers are arcane and ugly and hard to use. The only people using computers are people whose job it is to use computers. But in a low-slung building in Cupertino, California, these people have been working for insanely long hours, for insanely low pay, because they believe in their mission to transform those ugly, hard-to-use computers into an elegant, everyday appliance for the rest of us. So, this is like a 1998 iPad. It takes a long time to turn the page. So it is my honor to introduce 5 of the keyest players from that key team in the photo. First, he joined Apple in 1978. He worked on the Lisa, and then he was brought over to work on the Mac. He created Mac Paint and QuickDraw and HyperCard. He eventually became an Apple Fellow. He is here, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Atkinson. Amazing. Next up, he co-wrote much of the Mac's graphic user interface, and he developed a little thing called the Apple Newton. Yeah, they're not having one of these for its 40th birthday. Just what I was told. In 1994, he too became an Apple Fellow. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Steve Capps. You forgive me?
I've heard it all.
I asked him if he forgives me. He goes, I've heard it all. Next, Apple hired him in 1979, and he joined the nascent Mac team in early 1981. His business card said, Software Wizard. He was one of the primary authors of the original Mac system software. Here is Andy Hertzfeld.
Yay!
This is amazing. He came to Apple fresh out of Stanford in 1981. He co-developed the Finder and the Resource Manager, and he wrote the first desk accessories. Please welcome Bruce Horn. And finally, she is the artist who drew every Mac icon and every Mac font. She drew the hello in script that the Mac displayed on its screen, pixel by pixel. Her work gave the Mac much of its friendly personality. She is the person who decided that the interior of scroll bars should be gray.
I didn't even know about that.
She received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. It is Susan Kare, ladies and gentlemen. The Brain Trust. This is very cool, you guys. All right, well, we have so little to cover and so much time to do it in. No, wait, strike that, reverse it. So blow up this myth for me. There's this thing about how you and 7 others went over to Xerox PARC and saw menus, windows, the mouse. And to what extent did Apple use that, and to what extent was the Lisa and then the Mac all new?
First thing I'd say is that we were inspired by what we saw. Then we had to go and implement something. And there was a lot of hard work and a lot of invention and a lot of trial and error on things that didn't stick. We did a lot of work with a half-silvered mirror and watching people try to do stuff and get confused.
Wait, I thought Steve doesn't believe in focus groups.
Oh, this was in the Lisa team.
Oh.
wasn't focus groups. These were typically spouses of an Apple employee who was sitting there under semi-non-disclosure, and we'd give them a job. Here, edit this document and save it. And they'd get to a certain. We had a camera in the ceiling pointed at the keyboard and the mouse. Another pointed at the screen with their face reflected in it. See, you could and we asked them to mutter under their breath a stream of consciousness. What are they thinking about as they do something? And somebody'd get to a point where they're supposed to choose between do it and cancel. And they'd look a little miffed, and they hit cancel. And we'd play back the tapes and crank up the volume. What's this dolt? I'm no dolt. So the next day, it was okay and cancel. Now that it would have been even better to say save and discard, with a little more active verbs. But there was a lot of trial and error. And I know Apple was a little mad at me when there was a Microsoft deposition because I said, well, good engineers who were willing to do a lot of testing would come up with the same conclusions. You can't use dolt.
I have to clarify. So that came from do it, which came from Smalltalk, when you had in the Smalltalk system at Xerox PARC. So I actually went to college at Xerox PARC, and I went to Stanford the rest of the time. A bunch of that kind of stuff came from PARC, of course. The thinking, but as Bill says, the system was utterly unlike anything at PARC, brand new, and the thinking was new. It had to be on a small machine. I mean, the code that we wrote had to be tiny, right? So the resource manager is 3K bytes. Okay, and we had 64K ROM, right? And QuickDraw was 32 of that, about. The Finder, right? And the Finder was 46K bytes.
46. You couldn't put the
assembly
Finder's
code.
icon in 46K.
Oh, Susan could.
So, all right, so Lisa happened, and then the Mac happened. And from Stephen Levy's book, it seems like as January 24 drew nearer, there was a certain amount of panic and long nights within the Mac team. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what that was like? Did you have girlfriends and boyfriends? Did you eat? Did you sleep?
For me?
Good one.
Yeah, well, the 3 days before our deadline, I didn't sleep in about 72 hours. There were all 10 or 11 of us working on the Mac came in. We were saved, but Randy Wigington brought in a giant container of chocolate-covered espresso beans. And I don't think we could have done it without those.
There was one time right in that 72 hours where Andy was doing something and something crashed and he did this. And he saw that I saw him.
I was just too tired. I didn't want to admit the bug was here.
So I said, fess up. So we had to fix it at the very last second.
Good for you.
And things were in really bad shape like about an hour before our deadline. The deadline was 6 a.m. for Jerome to drive the disk to the factory for duplication. But
And there was a period where somebody had suggested, let's ship the Mac and then FedEx the disks next week.
Yeah, there was a time when Steve was in New York and all of us were totally burned out and we're sitting in a conference room and we had convinced ourselves that was a very good plan because there was only enough Macs. there were only enough Macs to have 2 for each store. So we said, why are we doing this? It's ridiculous. And everybody in the room, we all convinced ourselves that was a super smart idea. And then Steve, through a speakerphone, somehow bends reality and convinces us all that we were stupid and we better get back to work. And what do you know? We did.
Well, so that is what we hear about Steve Jobs, right? That he was alternately charming and a tyrant. And, I've seen this pattern. There are those who say Elon Musk works that way. there are people like that who have achieved amazing things that people say nobody else could have. How essential is it to have a bipolar, abusive personality? No, seriously, like, is that a prerequisite to shaking up the world like that?
I mean, besides us?
Well, if you read Brent Schneider's book on becoming Steve Jobs, you see a picture of Steve's development from gods and shitheads polarity to working with his people and developing them. And as he moved to Pixar, he actually learned to develop his people, and he got results. So you don't have to alternately praise and threaten people in order to get things done, but you do have to motivate them.
Unfortunately, none of us up here were
At Pixar.
yeah.
I actually feel sad to hear that people think that if they're mean or tyrannical, that was what was good about Steve Jobs. That definitely wasn't my experience, and I think he was funny and he was motivating and like all the, sometimes dramatic, and there's stories about him saying something inappropriate in an interview, like waltzing in and waltzing out. But
I can tell you some of those stories.
but I mean, it's not all just made up. But when I think back on those days, I think about, I miss him.
I miss Steve.
And I wish there was so much positivity and encouragement.
Yeah. Steve cared about beauty, and he's willing to sweat the details to encourage us to put the extra effort in to make it not just functional, but beautiful.
Encourage in quotes. All sorts of different ways, right? All sorts of different ways. He was immensely creative in figuring out ways to get you to think about something differently.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And he would try anything to get you, break you out of any block that you might have, or convince you to do something different. And how many different title bars did you have to do before he?
And I wasn't the only one.
I
The
know.
other thing, like when I'm describing Steve now, like looking back, I think I haven't met that many people who are able to contribute across such a wide band of, he could go to the factory and have some ideas. And certainly, I like that icon and not that. And typefaces and software.
Yeah.
I think that's
Here's
something that
one of the
was
ways he
distinctive.
motivated us.
Distinctive.
He said, real artists sign their work. And he brought around a piece of white paper and Sharpies, and all of us got to sign on them. And then he had those engraved on the hard tooling for the case. So if you take off the back of an original Mac, all of us have signed it. So he wanted us to take pride in our work. This is art. You're creating something beautiful.
He took the whole team to the Louis Comfort Tiffany exhibit, rented a bus. There were maybe about 20 of us at the time, because he said Tiffany was an artist who could mass produce his work, just like we will be.
Wow. Yeah, there is this theme of real artistship, and the conference rooms were named Picasso and Monet, and there was this running theme of art. But you guys were in your 20s? I mean, this is probably one of your very first jobs. Did that kind of talk do anything to you? Did it change your work? Did it make you less techie and more artistic?
Yes. I know Steve took me, I was working on the graphics primitives, and I didn't think that rounded corner rectangles were important enough, right? And Steve said, no, look around the real world. Everywhere you look, that monitor there has a rounded corner, this, and he took me for a walk, and he showed me rounded corner after rounded corner after rounded corner. And finally, when he got to a no parking sign, I said, okay, I'll figure it out. And the next day, and it turned out it didn't take any code to do. I just took the thing that made ellipses and ovals and started a little bit offset and paused in the middle. And I got rounded corner rects for free. I wouldn't have thought that rounded corner rectangles were important. Because they weren't in the SIGGRAPH core standard for graphics. But he saw that was necessary, and he motivated me. I ended up being very proud that we did rounded corner rectangles.
But I do think that everybody, at least everybody up here, but pretty much everybody in the whole team had an artistic side independent of Apple. He was into photography, he's into music. It's just we all were drawn to that because that's the way we thought too. That, it is worth making things better looking or easier to use or whatever, and it's worth staying up all night to accomplish that. And it was just a wonderful synergy between his desires and our desires. So I do believe that pretty much everybody on the team was a little bit different than your average Joe that wanted to make a product that had that extra sparkle, had that extra detail.
And so few of you, 10 or 20 people. Can you imagine like Google having 10 people for the Pixel 9? It's just like...
Well, no, the whole team from manufacturing to manuals to software to hardware was 100 people. And that's just unheard of today.
Yeah, that's astonishing. We should probably talk about Jeff Raskin. Mm-hmm. The mythology is, to the layperson, Steve Jobs invented the Mac and changed the world. But it's a little more complicated, right?
Yes. So I came to Apple because of Jeff Raskin. I knew him from UC San Diego. We were friends, and he was a professor, and I actually stayed at his house some of the time. And he was a good friend, and I was working on my PhD on neuroscience up at the University of Washington in Seattle. And he called me and said, something really cool is starting here. You got to come be part of it, this Apple computer. And I said, no way. I got to finish my PhD or I won't get to do research in consciousness. And Jeff wouldn't take no for an answer. He sent me round-trip airfare. He said, just visit for a weekend, no strings attached. My dad lived in Los Gatos, so it wasn't that far from Cupertino, and I came down for the weekend, and I will, to this day, never know what exactly Jeff said to Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs stayed with me the whole day and brought me around and introduced me to all 30 employees at Apple. And they were having fun, they were smart, they had a good heart, they were in the right place. At the end of the day, I wasn't convinced. I had to finish my graduate studies. And Steve put on his little reality distortion field here, and he said, what you read about a hot new product up in Seattle, that was really created 2 years prior. There's a lag between the time something is invented and the time it's available for people to use. If you want to change the world, you have to be ahead of that lag. And that sort of partly convinced me, and then he put it on heavy. He gave me a visual. He said, think how fun it is to surf on the front edge of a wave, and how not fun to dog paddle on the tail end of the same wave. That image stuck in my craw, and 2 weeks later, I had abandoned my PhD program, moved to Silicon Valley, and was working at Apple Computer. And so Steve had a way of motivating, and his motivation was, come here and help to change the world for the better. He called it making a dent in the world, but we knew that meant in a good way, not, But that's what attracted me, is he said, you can do something that matters. Use your life well.
Yeah.
So I came.
And he believed it.
And he did.
It wasn't a motivational tool he read in a book.
We did.
Yeah.
He said millions of people will use these things. But you write books, okay? If a publisher told you, I will guarantee to sell 1 million copies of your book, you'd be motivated to write a good one, right? Yeah. Well, that's what Steve did for us, and we were working 90 hours a week and loving it because we knew millions of people are going to benefit from whatever we did. And we wanted to do beautiful work that mattered and that people would enjoy using. And Steve motivated us.
Yeah, but Jeff deserves a lot of credit for putting together the vision of the Macintosh, which was if we could make a computer that was inexpensive and crucially really easy to use, we could sell computers by the million. And that stuck with the project all through, even though Jeff kind of left the team after a couple months after Steve came. 'Cause
He was
they were
pushed
sort of
out?
incompatible. Yeah.
Was he?
Well, what you know, Steve called us pirates. You know, the whole pirate flag thing. Many years after this happened, I realized that he made Jeff walk the plank.
Well, what happened is that Jeff founded the Macintosh project.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make an appliance that did what it did when you purchased it. Like a toaster never does something else. And Steve wrested the project away from him and turned it into a platform. You expect a computer to do something new every new application that comes out. And that's not really what Jeff wanted to build. And so if you had to be honest, you'd say Jeff Raskin was the father of the Macintosh project. And Steve Jobs was the father of the Macintosh.
But no slots.
Oh, he didn't want it to be possible.
Both hated slots.
He didn't even want it to be possible to put more than 128K memory in it. Burrell pulled a fast one on him and made it so that you could cut one trace and put in a 512K Fat Mac.
And then Burl at Radius pulled another fast one on him.
So for which Steve Jobs was ultimately grateful, right? Later in the year, he's like, oh, we can upgrade this to 512.
Yeah.
Well, very few people know that. The Mac that was used in that video that we played was a 512K Mac, one of the two 512K Macs that existed.
That's right.
I
Wait a
didn't know
minute,
that.
wait a minute.
I didn't
You're
know
saying that Apple and the marketing team sort of misled us?
I don't think it was misled. They wanted those letters to be that big and scrolling across.
The font wouldn't fit.
Well, speaking of fonts, so Susan, as all of us here know, design was so key to the Mac and so key to everything. I mean, car companies just change the sheet metal every model year to make consumers think it's a different car, it's a better car. What were the tools that you had? You had 32 pixels, black and white only, right, for these icons?
For icons.
For what?
For icons.
For icons.
That's not for fonts.
Right, right. And
A
Had
thousand,
fewer pixels. for
1,000 dots.
right.
on an icon.
So for the icons, I mean, what tool did you have to do the art?
Well, when I very first got to Apple, I wasn't, I was working on tools as they were being developed, and Andy actually wrote an icon editor. Because sometimes people say, oh, like you did all that on graph paper? And I did make some icons on graph paper to try to get the job. But then, and it was actually, you know, it was pre-Photoshop, you know. Kids today don't know that one level of undo is really exciting. But you could see it enlarged and small at the same time. And I usually just think you can be creative within any constraints. I mean, black and white was, you just need to know what they are and then work within that.
So you weren't like, you got to be kidding. I have to make a printer in 32 pixels. You weren't like that?
No, you know what? It was so, I thought it was really exciting and really fun. And I tend to like things that are a little, you know, tablespoon of humor, and that was okay. And I think that there was plenty you could do within that.
Yeah.
So,
And was there a constant barrage of lists of things the team wanted? We need this icon, we need this font, we need the bomb icon for the dialog box.
I mean, I have to say one of my favorite icons Steve Capps did for ResEdit. I wish I had done that. But, and Bill made some nice fonts even before I got there. Venice.
You made Venice? Mm-hmm. Wow. Why were all the fonts named after cities?
Why not?
Well,
Susan and I went to
we first
high
named them after cities from the Philadelphia
The
suburban
stops
area.
on the Paoli local.
So watching Susan Kare edit icons was an inspiration that led to fat bits in MacPaint. Many of the things that I designed for MacPaint, I would look at what she was trying to do and say, oh, there's an easier way to do that. And it ended up working its way into a feature in MacPaint. So I kind of credit Susan as a co-designer of the feature set of MacPaint. I wrote all the code, but she gave me ideas.
Yeah, I would say it wasn't exactly an equal split, but it was, really kind of an honor when I think back on it to work with. I was so happy that I wasn't in an art department. I got to be in the Mac software group, and I could often hear people talk about what might be a good thing to have that was something you could draw. I mean, believe me, I knew I wasn't a programmer, but I came to appreciate how amazing the programmers were that I got to work with. And there's actually quite a bit of freedom. It's not like now where so many things are taken, where you Google some icon and you see 500 ears for sound. It was nice. There was a kind of a blank canvas that was.
Well, speaking of things being taken, when I was a young college kid evangelizing the Mac to everyone who would listen to me, one of the things I would talk about in the Mac's brilliance was the keyboard shortcuts and the mnemonics. Look, X is cut because it's like scissors. C stands for copy. And Z because it's the last letter. It's like rewinding. So who came up with, and now of course that's standard across the universe. Microsoft took the same mappings, the bottom row, they're all next to each other. Z, X, C, V for paste because it's like a carrot, an editor's carrot.
Maybe
It's
reading
so
in a little too much to it, but
So
Bill and
I got-
Larry have that story.
I got to be a member of both the Lisa team, which was the predecessor to the Macintosh, and the Macintosh
I've
team.
heard of it.
And I went to visit Doug Engelbart. He had invented this beautiful augment system, very powerful, but really geared toward a professional knowledge worker. It took years to learn how to use it, but it gave power. And I visited him, and I showed him what we were working on the Lisa, and he said, in your quest to make something user-friendly, be sure you don't lock out the power user who wants to go fast later, right? Find a way to allow somebody who is an expert to not be held back by your user-friendly. So that night, I added the command keys.
It was you?
Yeah, well, I added the command keys. I think Larry Tesler chose CXV.
And I believe it was because you could just keep your left hand in one place.
Yeah.
Your
So
mouse
you can
is on-
read into the V being a carrot. I don't think that ever entered into the equation.
Right. But at one point we thought about having cut, paste, copy keys on the keyboard, and we thought that wasn't general enough, and so we didn't do it. But the fact that there are keyboard shortcuts, I credit a little goading by Doug Engelbart.
Well, and if you know your history, that influenced. He had a two-handed interface, mouse, and a chord keyboard.
Yeah.
And that's why the early Altos had a chord keyboard that nobody ever used. And so
Tell what a chording keyboard is. This is nuts.
it was just like how many
There were
switches?
five
Five
keys,
switches.
five keys on one.
Five
Five
switches.
keys.
Your left
and
hand.
three
if you were
buttons on the
right-handed.
mouse made 8 bits.
So if you're as
You
talented
had to
as
do
he is on a
combinations
keyboard-
of them, right? These three, and not that. You have to do the Vulcan, thing.
And you would type words with this thing?
No. It would augment.
He could.
Everything was
okay.
augmentation with Engelbart, right?
Right.
You would augment what you were doing with the mouse by, you hit a C major over here, and then you'd do something there.
This is why it took 4 years to learn.
And he also wanted 3 buttons on the mouse, right?
Yeah.
Well, the 3 buttons were because that was 8 bits. You'd had 5 on the keyboard, 5 on the key, and 3 on the mouse on the Alto.
I see.
And that just mapped to 8 bits in the memory on the Alto, and that's where it read.
Right.
Why did we go with 1 button? And the reason is we tried to put labels on them. what would they mean? And each application had different meanings for them. And we watched as people spent more time looking at the mouse than at the screen. And we realized if we made it only one button, they'd stop looking at the damn mouse. And they would just look at the screen.
Bill, to be fair, there's command click, there's option pick click,
Yes.
there's command option shift click, there's all sorts of clicks. So you need
And
all
the
of
horrible,
that.
horrible double click.
Yeah, right. And
That
the
was a
double-
mistake.
The double click came from Park as well.
Double click was a mistake?
Yeah.
Microsoft has triple click.
Triple click was from-
Microsoft has right click, which I have to give them credit for, actually.
When you double click, how do you know if they mean to do 2 clicks? Well, if they're too far apart, then it's 2 single clicks. So they have to be close enough together. And then how do you know, another way is they have to be within a short period of time. And so beginners, they would be kind of spastic about this, and they'd sort of stab at this thing, and the mouse would move, and it wouldn't count as a double click. And so it was stressful. And I think Tom Malloy suggested, and we should have listened to, a suggestion of putting a shifter on the side of the mouse that was like a shift key. If you normally if you type on a keyboard, you get lowercase. You hold the shifting, then you get uppercase. The select and extend should be that shift key there, and we didn't do that. We used double click.
There's a parallel universe somewhere.
Definitely.
So there is this sense that you guys were on a mission, you were young, you were idealistic, you were tireless, you were inspired. Is it too tropey to say that these were the best times of your working lives and that it could never be recreated?
Correct.
Yeah?
Because
I would agree with.
So I say.
I would agree with the last
basically
half.
It's been, I started at Park, which was pretty great. I loved Park. And then Apple was even better. And I always joke, it's been downhill ever since. Only a little bit.
I think we would have paid Apple to work there if that's what was required, and they actually paid us, so we made out. We had fun.
You guys are clearly idols and icons for this crowd. Do people ever stop you in restaurants and?
Actually, I have a story with
They
that.
don't recognize me. I used to have more hair.
I have a story about that. Waz and I, at that time, were very similar looking. And we shared the same first name. So people would stop at a conference. I was in New Orleans once. Somebody goes, Steve. And I turn around, oh, yeah, hi. I'm, of course, going, who the hell are you? And we had this very long conversation. I wrote music software, and we're talking about music, and we're doing this stuff. They're talking about the US Festival. That's what they were talking about. But there was enough continuity of the conversation that, and then about 5-10 minutes into the conversation, I go, oh. And I said, am I going to admit it to this guy? So I said, thanks, good to see you, gotta go.
Well, I'll tell you what, if I ever see any of you in a restaurant, I'm asking for a selfie.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, the original Mac team! Thank you so much. So much. Thank you so much.
Here we go.
That's all the time we have, yeah.
Okay,
Oh
thank
my
you.
gosh.
I feel like there's so many people that were on the Mac team right there. That would be nice. There are a lot of other people here.
Yes, there
who
are a
on
lot.
Yeah, we
the
have them
original
stand.
That's right. This isn't the whole Mac team
Yeah.
at all.
The Mac team
The
that
software
we
team.
had tonight on this panel. All right. Oh my God, I am in woozy, starstruck land. 40 years and 2 days ago, the 1984 Super Bowl was on TV. And if you had been watching that Super Bowl, you're on your couch, you got your Doritos, you would have seen this ad. But 2024, They have our data. They're spying on us. Okay. So that, of course, became one of the famous TV ads in all of history. Chiat Day, the agency, put that together. Ridley Scott directed it. It cost a staggering $900,000 to shoot that ad. It was part of another incredible achievement, which was taking this amazing invention and introducing it to the rest of the world as a culture, to explain it, to market it, to sell it. So let's meet our next panelists. She came to Silicon Valley in 1983 to work for Regis McKenna and to help Steve Jobs launch the Macintosh. Later, when he formed Next and acquired Pixar, he chose her public relations agency, Cunningham Communication, to represent him and Apple. Please welcome Andy Cunningham. Steve Jobs himself recruited our next guest to work at Apple, where he became part of the original Mac team, developing the Mac's marketing strategy, and following co-founding Next and then a quick 17-year detour at Microsoft, he is now CEO of this very museum. Please welcome back Daniel Lewin. He was Apple's marketing manager, reporting to Steve Jobs and overseeing the startup marketing of the Macintosh line. It is Mike Murray. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
So that ad, there's some story, right? There's some history. Not everybody was crazy about it.
So
Go, Mike.
we had to show it to the Apple board of directors before the Super Bowl, and my job was to roll the VCR machine into the board meeting. No, but we thought they would be as excited as Steve and I were. So I roll it in, and I press start, and halfway through, I clearly remember one of the board members had his head down on the desk. And he was pounding on the desk with his fist, like this. And I thought, he really likes it. And then he lifted his head up, and I realized, I'm being fired. And he turned to Steve, and he said, in a tone that you only use when you're inviting someone to your own funeral, he said, "You really like that, Steve?" And then the entire board instructed Steve, telling him, "You will never show that commercial ever. Ever." So and that was like on a Friday, and the Super Bowl was on Sunday. So I was told to call Chiat Day, our incredible ad agency in LA, and I worked with them all the time, that we had to sell both ads. We were going to show it twice on the Super Bowl. First, you show the 60-second spot, and then to save money, you always show the 30-second spot. But consumers, you and me, we can't tell the difference. For real. So I call them up late on Friday afternoon, and it's one of those good news, bad news stories, but you skip the good news, and you say, "Guys, we only have bad news. We can't show the spots." And they say, "What are we going to do?" And I say, "I have no idea." "So do we have any old Apple II for Education ads that we can show?" Oh my God. "Or can we sell the ads to Gillette or Ford Motor Company or a beer company?" Those were our options, right? We sold the 30-second spot, but I'm sorry to tell you tonight, sorry, but we were unable to sell the 60-second spot.
How hard did you try?
Daniel's asking the most important question.
How hard did you try?
I have never asked them. So I reported dutifully back to Steve, who told the board, "I'm sorry, we could not find a buyer for the 60-second spot, and we have no other ad that we can show." So we were forced to show it. A couple weeks later, the entire Mac executive team, and the whole team, as you know, was small, so there are like 5 of us on the exec team. We were asked to come into the board of directors. We came in, and we didn't know what was going to happen, and they stood up and gave us a standing ovation. Apparently, they had changed their mind.
That is the best story. Good night, everybody. That is incredible. I mean, one thing about it strikes me is it's very counterculture, right? Steve Jobs had this thing about IBM is the corporate dominant gorilla, and we are the David, and they're the Goliath, and we have to. But wasn't your job to sell this thing into those very same corporations?
Yeah, that was the idea. We were going to we were going to displace every IBM PC on the planet.
But how are you going to do that?
Amazing product.
Yeah, but if you're depicting them as Big Brother, how are you going to do that?
Well, another quick story, but it's going to take a little time to tell.
One of those quick ones, huh,
Yes.
Mike?
So the Mac comes out in January of 1984. Sometime in '83, we did have a focus group in New York, one of these very formal ones. And a bunch of us went back to New York, and it's where you have a two-way screen, and we're behind the screen, a window, and the focus group moderator has a group of hardened New York business people in a room with IBM PCs doing word processing and spreadsheets with PCs, and they're cutting and pasting with DOS and going through their routines. And then she brings in a prototype Mac. Mac wasn't out yet, and they're using it for the very first time, and the Mac is set up right in front of the two-way window where we're just right behind it. And these women and men are using a mouse for the very first time and the woman showing them how to cut and paste paragraphs, move them around. And suddenly these older business people in their 40s and 50s are acting like kids and giggling. And they're just loving it. So wrapping it up, she gathers them all back together and she says, okay, I have 5 questions. Which of these 2 products, Mac or IBM PC, is easier to use? Oh, the Mac. Which one would you be more productive with? Oh, the Mac. Which one would you be more effective in getting work done? Oh, the Mac, the Mac, the Mac, the Mac, the Mac. Okay, she says, I have one last question. If you were responsible for purchasing computers for your large Fortune 500 company, which of these 2 computers would you recommend? Oh, the IBM PC. We knew at that moment that we were hosed. So we had to find a whole bunch for the rest of us's out there to buy it. It was very complicated.
Which only took 9 years.
But yes.
Which only took 9 years, yeah.
Well, all right, so Andy, I know this is a love fest and all that, but I wouldn't be a journalist if I didn't get hard hitting for a minute here. So Apple, you were Apple PR 1.0, right?
Well, not 1.0, but yes, very early on. I mean, I was for the Mac, yes.
You were Mac PR. Mac PR 1.0. So during my era writing for the Times and for Macworld, Apple PR became known as being incredibly effective by being incredibly controlling, right? If you said something bad about Apple, you don't get review units anymore and stuff like that. And the whole thing about Apple introduced this thing about we do not show a product until it's a surprise, no leaks and all that stuff. So did any of that start with you, or?
Well, I was responsible for the strategy of we don't need to waste time with the trade press because they're already going to cover us positively. So let's not waste time with them.
I can't work like this. Oh my God, that's so mean.
We needed the time. We brought in 100 journalists from the business press community to each have almost a full day at Apple of an experience all by themselves with the Mac team and with Scully and with Steve Jobs and the factory and the whole 9 yards. And we needed the time. It was me and Jane Anderson. I don't know, Jane, are you here?
Yeah.
All right, it was me and Jane Anderson doing 100 of these interviews every single day with all these folks. So we didn't have time for the trade press, and we knew they were going to cover us positively anyway. So we let them take a few pictures. Stuart Alsop was really pissed at us for a long time, but we kissed and made up. So.
Oh my gosh! And Dan, there's something about that you told me earlier about you couldn't sell computers by shipping them?
Well, long ago, yeah, the distribution strategies at the time in this industry were different than they are now. And, you couldn't actually sell an Apple computer without a physical handoff in something that was called the STO, the service training and orientation discussion with people. And so there was a process that we implemented, particularly in the university community, which was the channel that I focused on, thanks to Mike, and really Joanna Hoffman was the one with the fundamental idea, and there was a woman named Carolyn Audrey Huntley who helped set those things up. But we enlisted the universities to take ownership of the systems, either through their foundations or a bookstore in some structured way so that a handoff would be made. But back in those days, consumer protection, fraud issues, people were not mail ordering these products at all. They just weren't allowed to be sold through the mail. It's just like plugging a phone into the telephone network, unless Wozniak was working on it. But, you know, it really was. It was arcane, and these things were unique. PCs were a new model. They came with the operating systems. Computers prior to that were sold separate, the hardware from the operating system. There were monthly fees. If you wanted to move a computer in a university laboratory down the hall, you had to hire the engineers, service engineers from the companies to physically move it, even though the university people were more accomplished, et cetera. So we set up a new model, and it sort of broke things away, which in the end was the strategy that Steve had in mind, which was coming off of the back of the factory. The FedEx box that could house a Macintosh could move anywhere in the United States in 48 hours for $20 or whatever was the idea. And we'd go direct to the individual, which is eventually what Dell pioneered. But the university thing was a little slice and a way to go do that to start. And of course, the hard part was we had to compete with PC Juniors and DEC Rainbows. But other than that, Mac did well in the market, right?
So help me understand that the reason you couldn't ship direct was because some kind of consumer protection?
Consumer protection.
What protect against what?
Well, there's a computer down in the museum downstairs that Neiman Marcus actually promoted and marketed, but never sold any of, that actually housed recipes, and I think people thought it was going to cook their dinner, too. So they never sold any of them, but no, that's serious. Those were the old days, and we ended up actually in lawsuits about some of those things when we started going direct with some of the dealer network as well. It was really crazy.
That's really crazy.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to bring it up with the first panelists, but incredibly, the Mac did not sell. Yeah.
Well, I'll go there. I'll go there because if I recall, and I have pretty good memory on these things, there were about 20,000 units in inventory when we announced. And the factory had a run rate of about 20,000 units a month at the same time. And each dealer got 4 computers on the initial rollout. And then, of course, the expectation is they take more than 4 computers a month thereafter in the inventory. And the build plan was to go to 80,000 units a month within a year, because we were going to sell 1 million a year to the earlier panel, right? And I think what happened, more or less, is that the dealers took 4 computers a month for a series of months in a row. And then in the fall, back to school, we shipped the inventory, almost 50,000 computers in 1 month into higher education, which was the blast that many people here, I think, experienced, perhaps even you too.
Yeah, that's how I got mine.
And that, it's those individuals, again, thanks to the original ideas. I was just an interesting, I think, story. I was working on the Lisa as well, doing market development work, bringing in the Fortune 500 CEOs and their exec staffs to see and put their hands on a mouse and actually play with the system with Lisa Guide and all of that. And it was a full sneak preview program and a really interesting thing. And I asked questions about when they said they weren't particularly interested because we didn't have Fortran and all the other things that they wanted. Why don't we want to sell this to the people that invented it, the people in the universities and the research communities? And the division wasn't interested. Steve came to one of the sneak previews. It was Mary Kay Cosmetics. Richard Rogers is Mary Kay's son. He was running the company. They were the largest Xerox Star implementation in the world. They were in Dallas, where all that work was ongoing. And Steve came to that one. It's the only one that he came to. And he called me afterwards and said, because he'd seen all of my reports and interest in the university stuff. And he said he had just come to the division. Mike was already there, and Joanna was already there, and he said, you know, we care about what you're interested in. Come do this. So I went for a walk with Joanna, went over to Texaco Towers and saw what Andy was playing around with, and then came to work for Mike, and we set up this whole structure. And Mike gave the name the Apple University Consortium. That's the little binder that I had, goes back to that memory. And the whole notion was to bring, in this case, we started with a dozen. Mike and Steve gave a challenge. You get a dozen institutions, you know, we'll go buy some stuff, and that was fine. We slipped a little bit, the schedule, and so we ended up with 24 institutions. And that, in many ways, given the values, attitudes, and lifestyles, or the type of marketing that we were working on, and then the techniques that we took from George Lucas and Star Wars, that incited the next generation of developers and people who cared a lot about this style of computing. So thank you all for that.
And what's really significant about the work that Daniel did is we didn't just go to universities and saying, you might want to take a look at this. Daniel was saying, we'd like you to buy 1,000 in one purchase order for $1,000. The retail price is going to be...
Yeah, exactly. It was thanks for that. It was $2 million worth of product over a 3-year period with no penalty, but they had to sign the agreement. Encourage your faculty to develop software and integrate it into the system. All of those things.
Now, no one had ever done anything like this before. You could buy computers at the bookstore.
Now, not then.
But through the purchasing department to make a commitment to buy 1,000 computers, we locked them up. And that was a great way to go through the front door, but we were also hoping that this might create something where the Mac became the computer of choice for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, yeah.
And we may have been onto something there.
I'll tell you.
You may.
I'll tell you, just a couple quick anecdotes to give you a sense of it. We went to Brown, Andy Van Dam, Foley Van Dam Graphics, right? Andy was at Brown. So Andy came, Steve came, Mike Boych came, and I'd already been there a couple times, and we talked with Andy Van Dam and others. We went to Dartmouth. I went alone there, and they built their own networking protocols because they had invented time sharing, put Macs in every dorm room. Wherever there was a pillow, there was a phone line and a port, and they did all that on their own. UT Austin gave us a purchase order for 25,000 computers to say we want to get in line. So the excitement was there, and you know, it was an amazing thing. And the universities all opted in. The faculty members did it. We went to Kinko's, and they were reproducing the floppies, right? Because they had Professor's Press where they take chapters from textbooks and compose, you know, specialized curricula for a course based upon 9 chapters from 9 different books, and they were also processing floppies and handing them out with the academic software that they built on their own. So we set up just systems to get it out there that had never been done before.
How many people can still hum the disk drive music?
Anyway.
David, I just want to say something about the early days of trying to sell this thing. It was very evident, and Steve knew this from the beginning, that you had to touch this product in order to fall in love with it. And it really was a romance that you had with this computer. It was a romance. And I remember asking Steve, how do you pick people to work in the Macintosh division? Because I had come after all of these guys were there. And he said to me, you know, I sit them down in this little, remember that little office we had that looked like an office, and we used it as a pretend office to show off the product? So the Mac is sitting there like this. And Steve said, I sit the Mac down in front of the candidate, and I lean back, and I just watch them, and I see what they do. He doesn't tell them anything about the product at all. And when they kind of like pick put their hand on the mouse, and then they start to move it around, and then their eyes start to light up, and then they sparkle. And Steve said, when that sparkle occurs, I know they're right for the team.
Yeah.
I thought, that is a great way to hire people.
Yeah.
Wow.
But David, back to your point about how you're going to sell enough, and the Mac wasn't selling enough. It was a huge dilemma because we just had the panel with a brilliant technical team, hardware and software, and we loved the product. But as we would try to sell it into Fortune 500 companies, it wasn't working because it couldn't work with their existing infrastructure of mini computers and mainframes and the necessary connections that they needed. At that point in time, we were too soon,
Yeah.
too early.
Yeah.
So what could we do to hold on for 12, 18, 24 months, 36 months?
We were long gone after that, man.
Right. So it was kind of, in my mind at least, it was a Johnny Appleseed type of a marketing strategy of throwing just a bunch of seeds out. And I'm looking here and seeing Mike Boych in the front row, and I gave him a job title of software evangelist.
You came up with that?
And he says, what? And it was like, take a Mac and go out and visit every software development company you can find. And the reason we're giving you that job title is because we don't have any money to pay companies to write Mac software, but you're going to evangelize them and say, this is the coolest little box in the world, and see if you can get them to start writing software. And then after Mike, there was this guy.
This guy.
Alon Rossman. It was Alon Rossman, I think. Is he here? Oh, yeah, he's here.
This guy. And so there was that. And then there was the University Consortium.
Yeah.
And then we had a strange campaign called the Test Drive a Mac. With a leather glove, you could go into a store and take a Mac home for a weekend. And it looked like it was modeled after test driving a car, but we knew that if you could take it home and actually use the Mac, and you had teenagers, there was no way you were going to take it back to the computer store. But we were just hunting for ideas. One day, a guy named Chuck Geschke, is that how you say it? Yeah, he and his partner, Warnock, called and said, hey, we think we have something. And Steve and Bob Belleville and I don't know, maybe a couple others here, went down to their little place to see what they had. And they said, we think we have something that if we could find a laser printer and a Mac, we may be able to invent desktop publishing. They didn't say that, but that's what it was going to be, right? So what could we do? A little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there, that may be able to generate enough revenue all cobbled together that can keep this going until we can have a color display and a hard drive and a bigger system and networking, so we can really make this work.
Yeah, and that was John Scull and others that ran around, and the people that I'm sure he's here tonight. But yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things in terms of that people may or may not know about the software development community at that moment in time is that Microsoft was working on 3 products for the Mac. One of them was called Multiplan, eventually became Excel. One was called Word, and the other one was called Access, was a little database. What most people don't know is that Apple had the distribution rights to those products. And we gave them back in a swap. So the history is very interesting, but they were the first developer. And in the end, I think the Apple II boot ROM became a no-charge product because it had Apple Basic or Microsoft Basic in it and stuff. So those are some old, interesting moments that I think may or may not be known.
Well, I remember,
but now they are.
I remember sitting in a marketing meeting with Mike while we were trying to figure this all out, and he invented a whole new marketing strategy, which he ended up nicknaming diagonal marketing. Do you remember that? You know, those of you who are marketers, you know there's vertical marketing and there's horizontal marketing. Well, we had this problem. We couldn't sell this product, so he invented diagonal marketing. And I use that to this day because I claim that it's all about psychographics.
$5, please.
It is. It really was.
Well, this thing really should be a 10-part limited series on Netflix. We could go. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I do have one more question. Were you guys under the same pressures from Steve Jobs of be an artist, be driven, be passionate, we're going to make a dent in the universe? Were you under the reality distortion field as well, or were you suits?
Yeah, we totally were. I was. I mean, I for sure was. All the rejets, as we were called, who worked on this, mostly me and Jane.
Because
rejets.
Yeah, rejets.
Yes, but yes, we were totally.
I think I felt more pressure because the technical team were just so brilliant, and the work they had done, it was just so extraordinary, taking from Lisa, taking from Park, and putting it all in this small box, and they had worked so hard, and we couldn't fail them. And though it was imperfect for the marketplace at the time, we had to get it out there, and we had to make it stick.
Yeah.
We had to.
Yeah. For me personally, one other person I want to mention is Floyd Kwame, and he's here tonight. Floyd created, for those who know Floyd, I mean, he created the air cover in a company that was bound to and successful as a result of the dealer network. And what I did was to go directly against the grain to figure out a new approach, which again was part of this whole notion about, these things are going to be appliances and we're just going to ship them to people. And the whole model of operation, the notion of Apple stores was under discussion. We were considering those things. So again, fast forward and think differently, and Apple stores and all those things. We were modeling economics behind that stuff. And Floyd created the air cover. I remember sitting with the dealer council, of which there were a dozen dealers, and they came in once a quarter or whatever, and they were everything, because the channel was everything. And they were going crazy because Macintoshes had flooded their territories as a result of this university program that we'd set up. And I listened and I took the heat, but in the end, I got to smile and say, well, that's really interesting, because there's 24 institutions and they each have 2 machines. So without the air cover, and again, Steve let me go, and he came on one trip, and so I felt like the company was willing to make the change because there was air cover and support, and without, like Mike said, without the product and the team behind it, and knowing that we were going to have this thing in the end, you didn't have to be fearless. You just had to be on airplanes and wear a suit a lot, which is what I did. So.
It's funny. I remember AirDrop and AirPlay and Airport, but air cover, I don't.
One last thing, though. It wasn't the 3 of us. The team that we had, that we got to work with, what a joy, and what a talented team of men and women. And we saw a few of them last night, and it just reminded me, wow. It was just, that was the chance of a lifetime to work with such an incredibly fun, talented, creative group of hardworking people. That was the treat.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mike, Daniel, Andy, thank you so much. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Great job.
So Steve Jobs was ousted from Apple. When he returned in 1997, what he found was a mess. There were 800 different models. The company had burned through 3 CEOs. And especially, Steve felt the company had lost its vision, had lost the nugget of belief and truth that he had founded. So he fired his ad agent, the ad agency of the time. He rehired Chiat Day, and he distilled what he thought Apple should mean down to the other famous ad. I spent the next 6 months having to explain grammar to people. That's not grammatical. You idiot! It's not an adverb! They're not saying to think differently. They're saying think about the concept of different. It's like think pink, or think thin, or think snow. It's happened before. Anyway, sorry. I'm not bitter. So many arguments. We're going to conclude tonight with one more panel. This is to explore the Mac's impact, its lasting impact, and the dent it made in the world. So let's meet our first panelist. He's actually already been introduced. Those of us in the cult of Macintosh know of him as Apple's former chief evangelist. He preached the gospel of Mac to developers and beyond during those early days of Mac. Later, he returned as an Apple Fellow in 1995. It is Guy Kawasaki live.
Shake, shake. Thank you. Oh, my God.
Haven't you heard? There's COVID back again. All right. Next, he is Apple's longest continuously serving employee, 47 years, and he's still there. He joined Steve Wozniak and Jobs in 1976 in the garage and became an official Apple.
Has he vested yet?
God, I hope so. And he became an official Apple Computer employee in 1977. He managed user education on the original Mac team. Today, he is still at Apple working in services engineering. It's Chris Espinosa. And finally, he was the first and best chronicler of the Mac story, especially in his amazing book, Insanely Great. He is Wired's editor-at-large. He's a veteran of Newsweek. He's the founder of Back Channel. Stephen Levy is here. So we are gathered here today to talk about the Mac's impact, but that could be anything. It could talk about the way the graphic interface caught on, or the marketing or caught on. So apart from the technical aspects, the park stuff, the menus and the windows, what were some of the other cultural impacts that are still with us?
Well, we won. I mean, very simply, no Mac, no Apple, no iPhone.
Oh.
All
right, that's the end of the panel, ladies and gentlemen.
But also, you talk to Tim Berners-Lee, and no Bill Atkinson, no HyperCard, no World Wide Web. I don't want to say that we're in Bedford Falls and that without the Mac it'd be Pottersville. Counterfactuals are really, really difficult. But what the Mac created, and especially the two things from the two previous panels. First is the artistry and the fact that we poured the humanities, not just the humanity, into the product and made it the reason to sell it. And then as my other former manager, Mike Murray, ably said, we completely failed to go head-to-head against IBM in the business market, so we had to find an alternative. And the alternatives was, you had business people who needed to get work done, and they could afford to train people, because people are disposable, in order to not pay for equipment, because equipment was capitalized. And so we weren't going to succeed there. And we weren't also succeeding in the home because there's no use for a computer in the home. People just wanted to play great games. So the last thing was you could give technology to people to unleash their creativity. That was the third place to go. And without that, I think we'd still be stuck in, okay, computers are just business machines, or computers are game machines, but not computers are artists.
But that makes it sound like the whole thing about the Mac is for artists, the Mac is for creative thinkers, was a plan B, like a fallback position, not the original.
Well, I mean, it's part of the time-honored tradition of Silicon Valley where you throw a lot of shit up against the wall. Some of it sticks. You go up to the wall and you paint the bullseye and you say, I hit the bullseye. Dave, I have to tell you something. I have, tried to moderate panels, and you are doing a superlative job. I just give it around. The mark of a really good moderator.
Yeah, let's hijack this whole thing.
The mark of a really good moderator is you can deal with audibles and changes, okay? And I want to make a suggestion. I didn't know who was going to be on one of these panels and who was going to be the audience. And had I known, I tell you something, I would have declined, because I think that rather than me being here, we should have Joanna Hoffman up here.
Joanna's here? Stand up! Joanna Hoffman is here!
Guy is now so tight with David that we're not going to get a word in.
Exactly.
No, but Joanne, I mean, seriously, The Computer History Museum has great AV people. They can handle things like this. And if you don't want to do it, then send Kate Winslet. But come on. Come on, Joanne.
Well, actually, did I hear that Mike Boych is also here?
I know, but Murray
Mike
already,
Boych is here, ladies and gentlemen.
But Murray already called him up.
I know, but
Okay, bring both in.
but
Come
wait a minute.
on.
But so what is the?
Because, with Boych, there was Jesus, and then there was Boych. The 2,000-year gap.
Which one are you?
I'm a mere copy.
He's just a guy.
And then there was Alon Rossman, who did all the work.
Right. So, but what is the relationship in the evangelist realm between Mike and Alain and you?
Well, Mike started software evangelism. Alon did all the work, and I took the credit. What was the question? Okay, Steve, come on. Steve.
Well, I didn't work there, so I'm not going to. But what
I
saw,
tried, Joanna.
what I saw, I've had a long career in reporting, but the one day, if someone asked me, what one day stands out most in your entire reporting career, I would have to say that day, I would think it was November 1983, where I went and embedded for a few days, into the Macintosh team. I had pitched the story to Andy a couple weeks earlier at Comdex, which was, if for some of you might recognize that name, it was a sort of computer show. And I thought she would jump all over it because I'm from Rolling Stone. And I thought, boy, they would think that was so cool. And she was saying, yeah, that's a good idea, it's a good idea. Then got back to me and said, well, I'm not quite sure about that because we actually would need the cover of Rolling Stone. And because she had mentioned it to Steve, and Steve said, of course, if they give us the cover. And, but the word leaked out to the team, and I think they were so excited about being in Rolling Stone that they got Steve to do it. But the first time I talked to Steve, he, just launched in this thing. I called Jan Wenner. I told him what an idiot he was. He's making a terrible mistake by not putting Macintosh on the cover of Rolling Stone. And I thought, wow. And he also, he said, I was reading Rolling Stone on the plane. It's the worst piece of garbage I ever read. There's this terrible story about MTV in there, and he's going on and on about it. And I'm waiting for it to pause for a second and take a breath so I can say, Steve, I wrote that story. And when I finally got that out, he just looked at me a second, then changed the subject entirely. But that day, I met Steve at the end of the day, but during that day, I met all those people you met out there, and I knew right that moment, a revolution had happened on a few levels. One was that I had been writing about computers for like maybe 18 months at that point, and they were hard things to use. And the problem was, I didn't realize this till later when I was trying to grapple with it in a book, was there was this digital world out there. And the way people use computers, we were at a distance with it. It was like throwing messages over a fence. And the very first time I saw that machine and was able to interact with it and like reach a folder and open it, and the words appeared just like they would appear on a printed page, and you would type that. That was amazing to me because I've spent my career writing things, waiting for to go to the printing press and come back, and there it was on the screen, and interacting with the stuff, and moving the cursor around. I now can interact with the digital world, and that's the way we do it 1,000 times a day now, and don't even think about it. And that was the inflection point that I was seeing right at that moment, and that was amazing. And then the second amazing thing was meeting those people. You, the team there, they were people roughly of my generation who were raised in the counterculture. They were excited by the same music I was. They were making rock and roll. Mm-hmm. And this was something I realized again later. This was the first startup. Now, you were in the garage when Apple was really a startup. But my guess is, like I did had researched this, my book Hackers, when I talked to you first, and that wasn't the same thing. The culture of what was going on at Bamley 3 in Macintosh was what every kind of great startup now goes through. They got great toys, they worked all the time, they were like excited, they had a culture of their own. So that Mac team invented startups. So there's just one of many other, innovations that is with us now from Macintosh.
And that's also, oh, sorry.
Well, your article was really important because what it did was it established the programmer as rock star ethos, and
I
there is.
cut it out, do I?
And his
You
book
get as many royalties as we do. So,
Yeah.
but the combination of there was a golden era there before people started coming to Silicon Valley and doing startups to get venture capital and then get an exit. And the product is, the only purpose of the product is to get the exit. There was a moment there with the evangelism and with the people you found, which was if I go to Silicon Valley and I invent something for the Macintosh, I'll be a rock star and I will get to change the world. And they changed the world with desktop publishing, with Aldus and with Adobe, and they changed the world with video editing, and they changed the world with music production, and they did all of these artistic things on the Macintosh that made them rock stars because there's really only going to be one or two spreadsheets. Okay, Randy, you made another spreadsheet. That was a great spreadsheet. But that kind of ethos took hold of the industry for decades before the web took over and changed everything again.
Well, Stephen, somewhere there's a self-help group for former journalists who've had meetings with Steve Jobs. Because when you were telling that story, this is the only story I'll tell tonight, but one time after Macworld Expo, I was invited for an audience with Steve Jobs, and I had just written an article for the Times website about how Windows XP was a total ripoff of Mac OS 8. I mean, they took the trash can and called it the recycle bin. Totally different. They took the menu bar and moved it to the bottom. Totally different. Took the Apple menu, called it the start menu. Different corner, And so I go in, I meet with Steve, and he's like, the trouble with you people is you're afraid to put Bill Gates' feet to the fire and accuse him of copying. I'm like, Steve, I did that this week. This week I did that. And he goes, it was in your blog. Nobody reads your blog. All right.
Where were we?
This is like therapy. So Guy, your evangelist job was to sell the Mac to developers, right? Was it, presumably it was harder to program for the Mac than for black screen, white letter,
Much
right?
better, yes.
Yeah. So what was the sales pitch? Was it try Mac Paint and you'll be converted,
Just to be clear, for the first year or two of my tenure at Apple, I basically carried Mike Boych's bags. So let's just be honest here, all right?
You learned from the best.
I'm probably the least qualified employee of the Mac division. Bruce Horn has a PhD, and Boych is like.
Why the hell are you up here?
Well, that's what I said, Joanne. Like, you asked Mike Boych when they interviewed me, and Mike was seeking Steve Jobs' feedback on hiring me. And more or less, this is a quote, correct me if I'm wrong, but Steve told Mike, well, you can hire a guy, but if he fails, I'm going to fire you too. Build up my confidence. So anyway, to tell you first of all, evangelism, in case you're, first of all, don't confuse evangelism and evangelicalism. Huge difference. I believe in vaccines, okay, and women's rights. So evangelism comes from a Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So what an evangelist does is bring good news. Mike and I brought the good news of Macintosh. For developers in particular, we opened up a new market for them of people who would never use a computer. Because of the richness of the Macintosh ROMs, we enabled them to write software they could never write before. And the third thing we offered to them was that at the time, the IBM PC division was getting into software. So if you had an IBM PC software and IBM decided to publish something that competed with you, you were basically screwed, right? Because IBM had all the channels and everything. So more or less, we gave them those 3 stories. And lesson 1 that I learned about evangelism is when you go to people and you give them those 3 stories, inevitably, Mike or I would hear them say one of them back to us. And they would say, oh, finally, I can write the software I always wanted. Or finally, we can stick it to IBM. Or, finally, we can reach these people who are the rest of us. And the lesson I learned, and Mike taught me this also, is that, listen, if people are open to what you want them to do, they will tell you how to sell to them. And all you have to do is shut up and listen and say that back to them. And they're going to think you're so smart. That's the secret to my success.
I think that works in many realms.
Well,
yeah.
I'm basically proof that if you do one thing right in your career, you can live off it the whole time.
I wasn't going to say it. So, well, Chris, I have a deep, profound question to ask you. You've been there since the garage, since the original founding principles of it's art, and we're going to change the world, and it's about creativity. Are there any Apple ethos principles today left that were still there?
Oh, God, absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And not just because Tim Cook's watching on the live stream.
No.
We've got some current Apple executives right here. They're looking very carefully.
The bad news is there's an entire layer of management there staring at me. The good news is none of them are my management.
Chris, vesting sets you free.
Obviously, I haven't done that one good thing yet because I can't dine out on it for the rest of my life yet, obviously. So I actually teach this at Apple University inside Apple. And it's really funny that we've gone through many iterations of it, and it goes all the way back to something that Mike Markkula published in 1978 under the title of Apple Marketing Principles. And there were 3 words: empathy, that is, know your customer, know what they want; focus, do fewer things better; and impute, always carry value in everything you do, okay? And those are things we do today. Those are things I teach when I teach the What Makes Apple Apple course and the Managing to the Apple Culture course, is that those values persist, and they're not just Steve's values, And the really strange thing is, and this gets back to, what has the impact of Apple been, and part of the impact of Apple is that we have changed the world, and part of it is that we have changed the way people deal with work, because we've actually tried to make working on computers at work fun a little bit, and it's kind of succeeded, maybe. We have a lot of fun, but I'm not sure everybody else does, because nobody's noticed that we run the most highly capitalized business in the history of world business, and we run it entirely on Macintoshes. So take that, Fortune 500. But one thing that we haven't changed is we haven't gotten the word out to people that if you make products that people love, you don't have to worry about where the money comes from, because that takes care of itself. And we've still got that ethos, that the focus from day one to today is, okay, the first thing I want to see, And the first thing those gentlemen in the front row want to see is, I want to see a demo. I want to see how the product works. I want to see what you're planning to do with the product. And it's been probably 15 years since I've been in a presentation that involved a P&L.
Wow.
Because that's just, we'll take care of that later. Get a great product first. And that's been there for nearly 50 years.
And when you say great, I mean, another argument I used to have in the days of Windows versus Mac is Apple does things better. So they didn't invent the mouse, didn't invent Wi-Fi, didn't invent the CD burner, but all of those things they took, added to the Mac in an easy-to-use, elegant, idiot-proof way, and all of a sudden, like, hey, it's called Airport. Well, I can get online. And it's just the matter of cleaning it up and doing it better seems to be an ethos.
Yeah, sometimes actually they innovated by getting rid of things. And so you look at the different eras of Macintosh, and I thought about this when I talked to some Apple people last week, and for the 40th anniversary, and did my column in Wired about it. I think that originally there was, like, I call it the interface Mac. There was design and other things there, but that really was what drove it there. And then I think things followed from that, during the Steve diaspora. And then when he came back, he kicked off the design era of Macintosh with the iMac, right? And then the iBook. And, so that was the distinguishing factor. And each time, like, a new Mac would come out, you wouldn't know what it would look like. Then when they came up, it looked like a lamp, a Lux lamp, right? And then, then there was something else, and, and that all changed. And then he would drop things out. All of a sudden, wait, where's the floppy disk? And there would be things missing. So he was bold enough to take us where we were going, and because later on other computers followed suit, and try to buy a computer with a floppy disk now.
Yeah.
If I may add, I would make the case that this appreciation for design and elegance and minimalism, it started with Woz when he was designing the IWM, right? So, I mean, so that's so deep in the Apple DNA. Luckily, Woz wasn't rich. Otherwise, all designs following might have been sloppy. But Woz had to make it work. And I think that's in the I mean, Woz is like the Henrietta Lacks of computer design. And so all stem cells came from Woz, basically.
In fact, Stephen, didn't you write that at one point Steve looked at the circuit board, the motherboard, and told the guy to redesign it because it wasn't tight enough? No one's going to see that.
Yeah, well, he said that didn't matter. So we know, and it has to be beautiful throughout.
Right.
And people, they would sense that. It would make a difference.
That's incredible. How about marketing and secrecy and PR and culture? Have those things that started with the Mac marketing trickled through to the rest of the industry?
That did not start with the Mac marketing. I mean, event marketing did, but for years, people in the Woz era remember this. One of the things that was said about Apple was, it's a funny kind of ship that leaks from the top. We pre-announced. I mean, everybody did. We pre-announced things. This was rife through the Spindler era. We would go out, and I was part of it. I was in the corporate briefing center, and I would tell them everything that was on our product calendar. I would tell them all of the things that were in our design lab. I would tell them all the things in advanced technology group, and then we would not ship it. And that was somewhat damaging to our bottom line, our reputation.
But we had the T-shirts.
We had the T-shirts. The Dan Cochrane model, I mean, the first thing you needed was a code name, and then you needed an icon and a T-shirt, and then you could start working on the product design. And so I think when Steve came back, he knew that was a fundamental dysfunction, not just in the company, but it was a fundamental dysfunction in trying to sell to the business market, because the business market wanted a 5-year roadmap, so they could take your 5-year roadmap to the competition and tell them to do it faster, better, cheaper. And so we stopped doing that. And we started looking at, okay, the really important thing is to make a psychic dent in what people's expectations are and come out with something that is new and surprising, because you only have one chance to surprise people. And the people accused us of, oh, this is all hype, but the difference was, when we hyped something, we were ready to ship it. And that is crucially important, There was sometimes a little bit of a gap with the original iMac. Word was going to get out that we were working on it, so Steve announced it before it could leak. And then the second thing was we really were on schedule to ship the iPhone, and we had to introduce it, and it took 6 months longer than we expected to ship the iPhone, but I think that worked out.
So the iPhone was an amazing, launch, because, Steve announced it. I think there was also some FCC requirement there that it was going to leak out anyway because of the papers they had to file or something. But he made the big announcement, and it made a huge splash, in January of 2007, right? And then they sort of went underground. And it was like all of a sudden, people forgot it existed. And there was this hunger to know about it. And people were talking about the Jesus phone, what's coming out there. And, and it had a second launch, was even bigger. And I was lucky enough to be one of the 4 product reviewers that got an early look at that.
As was I.
Yeah. Yeah, you were too, right? And you, so that was like, did Steve call you when you were,
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah, but
8 o'clock on a Saturday night.
But when we came out with our stories, and I think we all liked it, right, it was, like a frenzy that happened, and we were, big celebrities. But wait a minute, couldn't you just roll back that keynote and see everything that we saw? But for a few days, Newsweek paid us a little money when we went on a TV appearance, and my check was doubled, the week after the iPhone launch, because for 2 days we were the only people who talked about it. And but that was some contrast, as Chris said, to when in 1983 I was writing that Mac story. They basically, the PR people introduced me and let me run loose, and I got unbelievable quotes. Chris gave me a quote about the Apple III that said it was like a baby was conceived in an orgy and no one wanted it.
I did not say that.
He's so fired.
I have very close friends in the audience who worked on the Apple III with me. I did not say that.
You can read it, folks.
Did not say that.
But so there were no PR people in the room, I guarantee you.
Well, Stephen, I think I could now tell a story that I've never, ever told about those first iPhones that they gave us. It was Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, New York Times, and USA Today, the only 4 outside of Apple. I had a talk to give in Italy. I took the red eye. I was exhausted. I landed. I had it in my pocket. And you remember the first iPhone? The back of it was a capsule, shiny, slippery plastic. I slumped down in the cab on the way to the speaking engagement, and the thing fell out, and I lost it. Jaws is like, you! And I got to the speaking engagement, and we weren't supposed to show anyone, we weren't supposed to talk about it. I'm like, And so I went to the organizer and said, can you speak Italian to the cab company? I had the receipt. Is their number on there? Can you go? So they called the cab, they found the cab driver, he brought it back, had no idea what it was, thought it was some radio. He's swearing at me in Italian for wasting his time. He'd driven all the way back there. I emptied my wallet. No one ever knew that one of the first.
You should have just told him it's a Walkman.
David Pogue, the guy who lost the iPhone. Anyway. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This has been an amazing walk down memory lane. Whatever effects the Mac had on the world, I'm glad it did. More of that, please, and more of you. Thank you so much.
Well, here we go. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you all for your contributions tonight. It's really terrific. There's one thing that I wanted to say as I reflect on this program. I've been involved in a lot of things here in town for way too many years, more than 40, obviously. And one of the events that I attended, I was on the board of a small nonprofit, and they were giving out awards. And some people know who Grady Booch is, UML. Grady accepted an award that night, and frankly, he was a trustee at the museum as well over time, and he's been a good friend for a long time. And of course, he was talking about software because he received the award for his amazing work on UML and rational software. And then Gordon Moore was the next person to receive an award. And Gordon stood up and he said, you know, software is really interesting, but it's got to run on something. So what I wanted to do is just acknowledge, because we could only do so much of this program, all the people that built the hardware and the manufacturing infrastructure and everything else, because software is pretty and there's a lot of good stories about marketing it and everything else. But those who had anything to do with hardware associated with any of these products, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we weren't able to put it all on stage. These events can only last so long, and the team did a really nice job, so thanks to the team for bringing all that together. And it's almost impossible to think about how to end a program like this. So we do have one more thing. So David, why don't you come on back up here for a minute? You. And I'm going to exit because it's all yours, pal.
Oh, okay.
All right, great.
Some of you may know that tech was not my first career. I used to be a Broadway theater conductor. I used to conduct musicals. And so I have this side habit of writing parody lyrics about Macs and Apple stuff to old melodies. Would you like to hear a couple of these? You think you really had a choice? So you young people may not remember how crazy the early days were. Can you believe that in 1985, Apple fired Steve Jobs? It is true. They said he didn't have the skills necessary to run a large corporation. So 11 years go by, Apple is sinking, they're running out of ideas. In desperation, they ask Steve Jobs to come back to the company. I was there at the 1997 Macworld Expo when Steve returned to the stage. I had just seen the movie Evita with Madonna. And you know that scene on the balcony? Yeah, I was like, where have I seen this before? It won't be easy. You'll think I'm strange when I try to explain why I'm back after telling the press Apple's future is black. You won't believe me. All that you see is a kid in his teens who started out in a garage with only a buddy named Woz. You try rhyming with garage. Don't cry for me, Cupertino. Where am I? Oh, yeah. The truth is I never left you. I know the ropes now, know what the tricks are. I made a fortune over at Pixar. Don't cry for me, Cupertino. I've still got the drive and vision. I still wear sandals in any weather. It's just that these days, they're Gucci leather. So for the next 15 years, Steve used to take the stage at every Macworld Expo to announce the latest Apple stuff, to reveal what Apple had been working on, as we know. And the audience always went insane. It was the biggest rush. There was nothing like those Steve notes. So to the tune of Killing Me Softly. I heard he gave a good talk. I heard he had a style. And so I came to Macworld to listen for a while. And there he was, this thin man, black turtleneck and blue jeans, numbing my brain with charisma, changing my life with his slides. Look at the Macs in the grid there. I want to buy all of them. Oh, he's the god of the demo, selling me softly with his slides. I felt all flushed with fever. My sense of time was gone. Once his reality distortion field was on, I thought the show was over. Then he said one more thing, graphs of the sales of the iPhone. What's in the next Mac OS? Even the, here in the hands of the master, even the turkeys seem killer. Here comes Phil Schiller as filler. Finally, some pop band with a song. All right. Today, as you know, Apple is either the #1 or #2 most valuable company in the world. There have been times, however, when Apple was said to be failing, when it was at death's door, blah, blah, blah. These are actual quotes. I love rubbing their face in this. February 1996, Time magazine. Apple is a chaotic mess without a strategic vision and certainly no future. January 1996, Forrester Research. Never hire them. Apple is cooked. It's so classic, it's so sad. June 1997, Wired. From the cover story, 101 Ways to Save Apple. #1, admit it, you're out of the hardware game. Everyone said, too bad Apple is dead, but the Mac played on. Right from the start, they said they tore Apple apart, but the Mac played on. And when Windows debuted, they said Apple was screwed. They swore that the Mac would be gone. They hadn't foreseen how we'd love that machine, and the Mac played on. Key change! Then Steve Jobs split, and they said that was it, but the Mac played on. All of bad press and the market share mess, could the Mac play on? There was hope in the land when John Scully was canned, but the pundits just stifled a yawn. They just had no feel for the fans and their zeal, and the Mac played on. Today it's well known Apple mostly makes phones, but the Mac plays on. Rumors still flow that the Mac's next to go, but the Mac plays on. It's been 40 long years since their blood, sweat, and tears. Yet here we are somehow still drawn. And that's how I know that despite any blow, the Mac will play on. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. And then the last thing that we really want to do, because that was hard to top, is to invite all the speakers and panelists, and then anyone who worked in the Mac division to come on up on the stage or across the front, because we do like to get photographs of people who participated in the creation of this wonderful event and this evening as well. So thank you for that. So if everyone would just wave for that. And anyone who worked in the group, I know there's so many people we called out who deserve to be on stage. And so we're going to make that happen right now. So please come on up.